Welcome back to Connect MKE. I'm your host, Andrea Williams. Our focus today has been on systemic racism. Combating systemic racism requires aggressive action to address structures, policies, and practices that contribute to the wealth gap, to health disparities, and to inequalities in educational access, outcomes, and beyond. My next guest worked 37 years at the Milwaukee Journal and Milwaukee Journal Sentinel as a reporter, columnist, and editor. And in 2009, he became a senior fellow in law and public policy at Marquette Law School, where he still works today. And you can catch his weekly column about education that appears on Sundays and sometimes other days right there online for the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel. It's a pleasure to be joined by Mr. Alan Borsuk. How are you?
I'm good, and I'm glad to be here.
I'm glad to have you here because when we talk about systemic racism, we know that these structures that have been in place for many, many years really do play a part in how we as a nation move forward. So you specialize in dealing with education, and we know that there's a lot of segregation within the Milwaukee public school system itself. So talk about the importance of shining a light on the disparities within the educational system.
I mean, you're right. It's been, what is it, 1954, so it's coming up on 70 years since the Supreme Court said school desegregation was unconstitutional, and yet a large number of schools nationwide, certainly in the city of Milwaukee, both MPS schools and non-MPS, certainly between the city of Milwaukee and the suburbs, schools are heavily segregated. Why, and why hasn't it changed? And there are some places where it has. You know, we could be here all day talking about that, but it is a fact. And it remains a fact that the quality of experience that kids have in school is highly related to their zip code, to their wealth, to the circumstances they're born into. I wish it weren't true, but white kids are doing better than black kids overall, again related to many other factors not that aren't race alone. But tell me a zip code and I'll tell you pretty much how the kids are doing. Tell me the name of a school, pretty much anywhere in the Milwaukee area, and I can tell you its racial or ethnic identity.
Wow. And you look at the aspect of some schools that are doing much better if you compare them to schools that are in the city versus the suburbs. You look at even housing scenarios where people are paying property taxes, and those property taxes go to support schools on a certain level. So all of those things play a role in what those schools are able to accomplish, so to speak, when it comes to education.
Sure.
What have you found in your writing and your work that you think needs to be done that really goes overlooked or not looked at all?
I think things are improving on this front, but for way too long, early childhood has been underestimated as an important time in kids' lives. The gaps, some people don't like to use that term, but it fits. The gaps in the success between rich kids, poor kids, white kids, black kids, whatever way you want to, Hispanic kids also, almost are entirely there when a child walks into 5-year-old kindergarten. Schools, I've read research like this, ultimately the school system does a pretty good job of not making the gaps worse. And it does a pretty bad job of closing the gaps. But the real story is that the gaps are there from birth to 4 years old, and improving programs available, care that's available, educational preschool opportunities is a really high priority. Coaching parents, mentoring parents, you know, there are close to zero parents who don't want to be really effective, good parents and see their kids turn out well. A lot of people don't know things that, like, what's something that my child can play with that would be, well, how do I talk to my child? Well, what should we be eating that would be healthier? There are answers to all of these things, and just creating a program. So that's one area that really is beginning to get more attention and would be really important. And then the whole subject of reading up through 3rd grade. It's a truism in education that If you are reading well by the end of 3rd grade, your chances of succeeding in school are pretty good.
Yeah.
And if you're not, they're not so good. Or to put it another way, up till through 3rd grade, you learn to read, and after that, you read to learn. Well, the reading scores in the city of Milwaukee, certainly in Milwaukee Public Schools, but also in a large number of non-MPS schools, and about half the kids in the city go to schools outside of MPS.
Mm-hmm.
Reading is a huge crisis in the city. The percentage of kids in MPS who are reading at what's considered by the state a proficient or better level is under 10%.
Wow.
And that just speaks to a very unpromising future for those kids. So early childhood and reading, those are two things I'd really beat the drum for.
Okay. Thank you for sharing that. And that's something that people from all sectors can really keep in mind.
Yeah.
So you have organizations who are trying to make a difference, trying to change the narrative. They can hone in on those things. And I think in an effort to help parents who may need a little extra guidance in making sure their child reaches that level, I think that's great stuff. So is there anything else dealing with education that you feel very passionate about?
You can have an argument of do we have too many people going to college, because there are a lot of jobs out there that don't require a college education, or at least not a 4-year degree. On the other hand, nothing has changed in all the last 50 years. Your ultimate income outcomes are going to match your education levels as a generalization.
Yeah. Makes sense.
So the better you do in school, the farther you go in school, the better you're going to do in life. So I'm big on every aspect of education. In Milwaukee, we've got huge problems with graduation rates, attendance, behavior in schools, political pressures that are tearing the community apart and have been doing so for over 30 years. And you say, come on, everybody, let's get together and make things better, because we can do better than this.
Absolutely. And speaking of politics, an idea that is likely to resurface when it comes to education is the attempts at breaking up MPS into smaller districts. And that's where I first, kind of had a light bulb come on about you and the things that you focus on. You disagree with this concept. Explain.
Well, I don't want to take a stand too flatly. My job is more like the color commentator in the booth at a football game, but I don't know the case for how this is really going to help kids, frankly. There have been many attempts going back 40 years or more to change MPS and to do something about central office. And to know the MPS system is not necessarily to love it. It's a huge bureaucracy. It's very frustrating. So I sympathize with that. And change comes super slowly.
Yeah.
So I understand that frustration. The current plan that was floated by the legislative majority Republicans just in the last 2 months is to break up MPS into smaller districts, that somehow smaller districts would offer better services. Like I said, frankly, I don't know the case for that, except that is what they're saying. And it passed the legislature. It will be stopped. As of now, it hasn't been acted on yet, but it will be stopped by Governor Tony Evers, a Democrat. He will veto it. There's just no question of that. So the real question is, who's going to win the governor's race in November? If Evers is reelected, he will remain the block against legislation of this kind and a lot of other issues that Republicans have been pushing in the legislature. If a Republican wins, sky's the limit. I mean, a lot will change, I expect.
Yeah, and with him having such a major background in education, it makes it that much more interesting. So thank you for talking more about that. But I also want to talk about some of the things that you've written about in the past. And if you kind of talk about it, you say, oh, that was a really long time ago.
Really long time
but
ago.
But unfortunately, not a lot has changed.
Right.
The environment is also affected by systemic racism and structures in place. And for someone who says, like, how is that? Well, For instance, there are fewer trees and plant diversity in lower income and racial minority neighborhoods across major cities in America. And these neighborhoods have more disease-carrying pests, such as rodents and mosquitoes, which inevitably affect health and well-being. But I think the most important thing to point out is the lead in the water.
I was just going to say, lead trumps most of that, although everything you said is true.
Yeah.
Lead not only coming in through the water, there's still many houses in Milwaukee, in older sections of Milwaukee, including the neighborhood I live in. I live in Sherman Park. And going east to, well, to the Milwaukee River, that have lead paint. Little kids, it's old paint by now, which means it's especially amenable to chipping and being around. Little kids pick it up and eat it. And then you'd have the problem of lead, not so much the water mains, the big mains that water comes in, but the laterals that go from the mains to your house. Lead is picked up in that. Lead is a huge problem for learning development in kids. It's bad.
And it goes back to that educational component.
Right, and there's a strong correlation between lead levels and ability to learn. So there is progress on doing more about this. A lot of there's progress on using some of the pandemic federal money, the rescue plan money, to accelerate the pace of removing lead water pipes. Hopefully things will get better. Lead paint itself was made illegal many years ago, but there's still houses on my block, I know, that have lead paint.
Thank you.
Glad to be here. It's an important subject. Glad to talk with you.
It has been a pleasure. Thank you. Mr. Alan Borsuk is a senior fellow in law and public policy at Marquette Law School. Again, you can read his weekly columns about education on the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel website, and that's going to do it for today's show. I'm your host, Andrea Williams, as always. Thank you for watching, and I hope you'll join us again next week as we take a look at the issues and introduce you to the people who are making a difference where we live, work, and play. Have a great day.